Welcome to Global Information Security Society for Professionals of Pakistan.
My name is Muhammad Ahmad and welcome to all people for CISSP course, and this is domain number 5, Identity and Access Management. So this will be around 1 hour and 20-minute session, and we will be covering whole domain for this CISSP course. So this is the procedure how you can use the Zoom client, and if you want to have any problem with the Zoom, you can just check with this procedure and you will be logged into this session as well. So brief intro to myself, and as I told you, my name is Muhammad Ahmad. I'm a seasoned professional and I have Masters in Computer Sciences, my B.Sc in Computer Sciences, MBA, and I hold multiple certification in information security domain like CISSP, CRISC, CISA, CISM, CGEIT, ISMS LA 27001, Senior Lead Risk Manager, ISO27005 ITIL. So these are the certification which I hold, and I do the training for the multiple courses including these certification as well. And I have experience on governance, risk management, etc. So if you want to follow me, you can just contact on the LinkedIn profile, which is available on the right corner as well. So identity and access management, and this domain is around 13% in overall CISSP course. And for example, if you come across 100 questions, then probably you will be getting around 13 questions from this domain. So this is very important domain and little bit somehow tricky domain. So you have to be very prepared according to the concept which will be available during this course of presentation. So this domain actually have around 5 subsections, and the first one is the control physical and logical access to the asset. The second one is manage identification and authentication of the people, devices, and services. The subsection and the third subdomain, I would say, is integrate identity as a third-party service, and we will be talking about IaaS, identity as a service. Then it has another subdomain which is implement and manage authorization mechanism, and we will be discussing about the different authorization mechanism in this one, like Kerberos, etc. And the fifth subsection of domain number 5 is manage the identity and access provisioning life cycle. So let's proceed with the first part, identity and access management. So identity and access management actually focus on the issue related with the granting, revoking, providing access to the data, and perform actions related to the identity and access on the system. So basically, the primary focus for this domain would be to have the identification, authorization, accountability as well. So one important aspect for this one, we have to differentiate between the authentication, authorization, and identification. And of course, accountability will also come here. So let's talk about the first subsection, which is 5.1, and that is control physical and logical access to asset, and asset can be of anything. So we will talk about the what actually asset is. So controlling access to the asset. So controlling access would be, let me add a few people as well. So controlling access to the asset is one of the main theme of this domain, and one of the main area of the security and providing access to the system. An asset can be for of any type, like information system, devices, facilities, or even personals. So that is very important that we are not only discussing access to these assets, but we are discussing access to any type of the asset within our organizational domain. So information, you have to think about what information is. So an organization information include all of its data, and data can be stored on multiple files, multiple servers, computer devices, and etc. So core object of this one would be the controlling the access to prevent the unauthorized access to the information, and information contains the data as well. So access to the system as well. So access to the system including IT information system, which actually provide one or more services like file system. Also, we are talking about access to the devices as well. So devices may refer to the computing system like servers, desktop, tablet, external devices as well, like printers as well, probably the web servers as well, or the third-party systems as well. So this is very important aspect when we talk about. So other aspect of the asset, which is actually our organization asset, is facilities. So organization facilities includes the physical location as well, like your data center as well, your entire building as well. So we have to see this aspect as well, why we are providing access, or we are providing the access to the system. Personals. One of the main aspect for access management is the personal. The personal here, human resource, is the valuable asset, and this is our first most priority to safeguard the asset. And same is applicable for the human resource as well. That we want that people should be given right access at the right time. So access control is all about having and managing the relationship between the subject and object. And if you remember, we have already discussed in the previous domain what is subject is and what is object. Just to recall, the subject would be the active entity. Active entity that require access to the passive object. And passive object can be anything which is not actually active. For active thing would be the user, program, processes, computer, or anything. And the passive, something like file, databases, etc. So this is all about the relationship between the subject and object. So whenever we are talking about the access control mechanism, we are actually talking about the relationship between the subject and object. So CIA, which is applicable on the information security, we have to manage this capability of CIA on the subject and object as well. So we are talking about the categories of the IT loss, which is the loss of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if we talk about the confidentiality in terms of the access control, then access control will help us that we are providing only authorized subject, and we are providing access to the object which are actually authorized. So whenever we are talking about the unauthorized access, actually we are talking about the loss of the confidentiality. So access control will help us that only authorized subject can access the object. The I part would be the integrity, which ensure that system and system configuration are not modified without authorization. And if there is some unauthorization occurs, for example, unauthorized changes are in system, then there should be some control mechanism who actually can detect the systems. So if unauthorized or unwanted changes to the object occur, it may lose the integrity of the system or integrity of the information. The third part is the availability, and availability requires that object must be granted to the subject within a reasonable time frame, and it should be to the right person. So right person, right time, the right information. That is the main part of the CIA in terms of the access control mechanism. So let's talk about the different types of the access control mechanism. So access control is maybe of any type in hardware, software, or administrative policy. But we have to understand the goal is to provide access to authorized subject and prevent the unauthorized access. So if we talk about the global perspective, then the primary objective would be uh, to, to prevent the unauthorized access. And if we categorize this access, it would be the preventive, detective, and corrective control types. We will talk about what are these categories. So you have to remember that only three main categories are there. One is preventive, other one is detective, and third one is corrective. There are other also as well, and these are deterrent, recovery, directive, and compensating as well. We are also going to discuss this one. So preventive access control mechanism. So preventive control mechanism actually stop the unwanted or unauthorized activity from the occurring. Like we have the biometric system, like we have access control mechanism, like you might have seen that these premises are under surveillance. That is, you are trying to prevent something from happening. So we have the EMV card, which actually avoiding the skimming of the card. So these are all type of the preventive control. Other type is the detective controls. So detective control actually attempt to discover or detect the unwanted or unauthorized activity. So it might be, you might have heard the motion sensors, recording system. There is also possibility of the job rotation policy, mandatory vacations, audit trail, honeypots. These are all type of the system that actually detects something, and it will help you to prevent something. The other type is the corrective access control. So corrective access control mechanism actually modified the environment to return the system to the normal operations. So for example, you have the antivirus solution with you and something happened with your system. What the antivirus system will do, it will actually correct the action of the corrupted file or the corrupted source of the malware. So it will return to the system. And there is another example, like the backup system is there. So if something file goes corrupted, the backup system restore the file from the backup. So these are all the corrective controls, the corrective action that that are applicable and that are available in the system. So another type which we talked about is the deterrent control. And I said before that someone says that be aware, this premises are under 24 by surveillance, so it is deterring someone to enter into your building. So it is actually discouraging someone to violate the policy of the company. So these type of access control mechanism fall under the deterrent. Another type of the access control mechanism, the recovery control mechanism, and we talk about something corrective and recovery. So these are similar related terms, and recovery control access mechanism attempt to recover and restore the resources. And you might have seen in your environment like regarding fault tolerance, hard drives, system imaging, server clustering, database or virtual machine shadowing. These are all type of the recovery access control mechanism. Another type of access control mechanism is directive access control mechanism. So directive control mechanism actually attempt to direct someone, to confine someone or control someone action, or you can say that it will encourage the person to comply with the policies, just like the company policies, company information security policies, the criteria, the poster are available within your environment. Escape routes will be there. So these are all putting the direction to the people that you have to follow this direction. So these comes all under the directive control access mechanism. Another type is the compensating access control. So one you do not have any solution available with you to provide something. So what you will do, you will compensate that weakness with some controls that comes under the compensating access control mechanism. So this is just an alternate of the possible solution. For example, two-factor authentication, the dongle key is there. So this is what you have as a compensating control. The tokenization of the system. So you will get the token from on your mobile, on your hard token. So this is all the compensating control that you have that you might have in your environment. So we talked about different controls: directive, administrative, compensating, corrective. So these are all the controls. And whenever you come across multiple questions in your exam, you have to be very vigilant that the question is asking about what type of control. So now let's talk about the control implementation. So access control also implemented via administrative, technically or physically. So the corrective control may comes in something type of logical, or the deterrent control may become under physical, or directive control may come under the administrative. So those were some different categories, and these are some broader categories how they are the controls are going to be implemented. So first type would be the administrative access control. So administrative access control mechanism are the policies and procedures which actually define the organization, how the organization is going to behave in some particular situation. So these type of the controls or the access mechanism is the administrative. And for example, you have some hiring practices, background check, classifying and labeling your data, security awareness, training effort, reports, review, testing. These all comes under the control implementation. The other aspect of the implementation is the logical and technical controls. So logical and technical controls are something of hardware and software mechanism which are actually used to manage and to provide a protection for the resources. And as this name supplies, this use the technology as the main course of action. So like you have a smart card, biometric, protocols, firewall, routers, intrusion detection system. So these comes under the logical or technical controls. The last type would be having the physical controls. So this is the type of the implementation. So physical controls are controls that actually you can physically touch. For example, you have fences with you, you have the security guards with you, you have swipe cards, you have dogs, you have the cable protection system, you have cameras, you have man traps, you have alarms. So these all comes under the implementation perspective of the physical controls. So this was the section 1.5.1, and now we are moving towards section 5.2. The section 5.2 actually talk about identification and authentication and authorization as well. So let's talk about the identification and authentication as well. So identification actually is the process of the subject claiming or professing an identity. So a subject must be provide the identity to the system that this is, hey, this is Ahmed over there. So it is all about the identification. So something which actually I have with me, now I am going to identify someone using its identification. For example, the username. I have the username with me that is going to identify me. I have the card with me that is going to identify me. I have the finger with me for the biometric. It is going to identify me. The next part is the authentication. So authentication actually verify the identity of the subject. Remember, the subject is the active part like user. And this is going to by comparing one or more factor against a database of the valid identities like user account. For example, it is going to check your password which you have provided to the system. So authentication information is used to verify the identity, which is a private information and which need to be protected. So something you have, which is the password, and something you are going to identify to the system, which is the username. Now talk about the authorization and accountability. So we have discussed in the previous slide identification and authentication. Now we are talking about the authorization and the accountability. So authorization is something that subject are granted access to the object which is based on the proven identities. For example, administrative are granted access to do something which has a high privileges on the system. I might not have the authorization to do some transaction over the system, so that part is fall under the authorization. And the accountability, which is actually users and other subject can be held accountable for their action, like audit trails you have. So auditing, the objective of the auditing is the accountability. So put the people accountable for their action. So in totality, an effective access control mechanism will require the strong identification, like from the username, authentication mechanism, and authorization and the accountability. So all these four factors will fall under the effective access control mechanism. So if you have one missing item from your access control mechanism, then I would say that access control mechanism is not effective access control mechanism. So subject must have a unique identity, and they should the subject should provide the identity which with authorization, with authentication actually, and the system will authorize this user based on the authentication. Let's talk about the different authentication factor that comes under this domain. And these actually, we are talking about the three main types of the authentication factor. And we talk about, and we mention as type 1 authentication, or type 1 factor, type 2 factor, or type 3 factor. Type 1 authentication factor is something you know. For example, the password you have that is going to identify you. So this is type 1 authentication factor, okay? The type 2 authentication factor is something you have with you. For example, the card, the EMV card, the debit card, the credit card, or the token, the physical token with you. So that is something you have. The third part is, which we called is a type 3 authentication, is something you are. The fingerprint, the biometric, the iris, the retina scan. And one important thing, the session is because this session is the 40 minutes session, the breakage of the 40-minute session, we will revert back after the disconnection on the same link as well. So probably the meeting will end in 3 minutes, and after 3 minutes, you have to disconnect the meeting and you have to reconnect the meeting again after probably 2 to 3 minutes, so that I can start a new session with same meeting ID. So you do not have to have a new URL for the meeting. You just need to rejoin the meeting on the same provided link. So these are the three authentication factors: type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 1 is something you know, type 2 is something you have, and type 3 something you are, which is the use of biometric, face recognition, etc. Another factor which is not under fall comes under the type 4 or type 3. And basically this is something, the preventive area is the something somewhere you are, like your geographical location, your caller ID, your something protocol. So that is something some person is somewhere are. Probably you might have seen that when you are using, for example, a Gmail in most of the country, if you go immediately to some other country, the Gmail will send you that email that we have seen a suspicious login to your account from some other country. Please verify, is this you? So the Google is preventing the login based on somewhere you are actually factor. So whenever you are designing the security, you may have to apply this factor as well for the critical systems. Another aspect which comes under this subsection 5.2 is the password. The password is the type 1 authentication factor, and this is most common technique to provide the authentication. And the meeting is actually going to end within a minute. So let's continue. And once the meeting is disconnected, you have to reconnect after 2 to 3 minutes again. Okay. So I was talking about the password, which is, I would say, the type 1, and you have to always have a strong password, like complex numbers, complex combination, capital, lower, so that the attacker may face difficulty in sniffing or in guessing the password. Cognitive password. Okay, the cognitive password. So another password mechanism is the cognitive password, and it talks about the series of the challenging question. For example, what is your mother name? It is all about the basic self-service based password reset mechanism or the assistance. So it may talk about what's your mother name, in which school you have studied. So these are all based on the challenging question. So cognitive password is helpful in your self-service based systems. So whenever you are talking about the self-service based mechanism, try to consider cognitive password. So another important aspect that when you are talking about the type 2 factor, so you have to think about the smart cards and token as well. So smart card and hardware token are both example of the type 2, and which is something you have. This is the factor of authentication. Or smart card, just like a credit card size, which has integrated circuit chip, which is actually chip in, and it contains the information about the authorized user. So in Pakistan, for example, the banks are issuing the EMV compliant card that has a private key on the card, and it has a chip card available. So these are all about the smart cards. The second part is the tokens. So for example, you have the tokens with you, and so mission critical application, for example, financials application, the banks are also providing some the token area, the token part, which actually you have with you, and it provides 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 digit number, and whenever you are doing something very important to your company, it will ask you to put some token number which is available from your token device, and you have to insert that number into the system to complete the transaction. So this is a hardware token device, and it provides one-time dynamic password. Another more important aspect the people mostly get confused is about the two-step authentication. Two-step authentication is not same as a type 2 factor. It's a second step authentication in which the person actually put the code, I would say the 4-digit or 6-digit code with the username and password, which is actually sent to user email address or user phone over the SMS. That is second step. You have to remember that for the factor 2, second factor, type 2 factor, which must be something you have, the physical something you have. You can tell the password to someone else. You can also tell the shortcode to someone else. That is not fall under the type 2 factor, in which we are talking about something you have. So this is the two-step authentication. You have to differentiate between the type 2 and two-step authentication as well. So biometric is type 3 authentication. So it is something you are actually, and we have multiple categories and multiple types for the biometric as well. First, which is very common, is the fingerprints, and fingerprint are the visible pattern on the fingers and the thumbs of the people, and these are the unique to the individual, and it has been used for decades. For example, you are using the biometric enabled ATM machines. So you put your finger over there, face recognition and the face scan. And the face scan actually using the geometric pattern of the face, and it detect and recognize it. And people, for most of the time, law enforcement agencies are actually using the face scan. For example, if you go to the Dubai, you have seen the face recognition systems over there, and even the companies are using the face scan as a attendance system over there. And in China, the government has put the cameras, CCTV cameras, with the face recognition facilities. So they are actually trying to detect the criminal while they are walking over there. Another factor, another biometric factor is the retina scan. Retina scan actually focus on the blood vessels of the eye. So these are also unique pattern within the body of the person. Another part is the iris scan. So iris is the colored area around the pupil. Iris scan also focused is one of the most accurate biometric authentication. So the people have some reservation on the iris scan, as it may give you some medical condition information. For example, the pregnancy or blood pressure information. So whenever you are trying to use the iris scan, you have to consider the privacy issues as well. So you might see some question in your exam that says that there is a privacy concern and which biometric mechanism would be the most suitable, then iris would not be your choice. Another factor would be the palm scan. The palm scan. The palm scan is very very important aspect. So whenever you are going to go for your CISSP exam, the Biometric Center will have the palm scan mechanism over there. So they scan your palm for the identification. So it uses the near infrared light to know about the vein pattern in your hand. Another aspect within the biometric is the hand geometry. So hand geometry actually recognizes the physical dimension of the hand of the person. It's actually see the width, length of the palm and fingers. So this is one of the factor in the biometric that you may consider when you are having some authentication mechanism within you. Another important area within the biometric is the voice pattern recognition. So voice pattern recognition is biometric authentication mechanism which actually relies on the personal speaking voice, which is we also call the voice pattern, voice print. So the person speaks some phrase which is actually recorded in the authentication system, and the same is used again and again for the authentication. Another biometric mechanism for the authentication is signatures, digital signatures. So if you go some hotels over there, so they digitally get the signature from you. So this recognize how a subject can write a string of the characters. So this is also very most common in the hotel industry, and they get the signature of the guest on the digital part. Another biometric category is the keystroke pattern. So keystroke pattern is how you type the keyboard of the system. So it actually measure the subject flight time and dwell time, and flight time is how long it take between the two key presses, and dwell time is how long a key is pressed. It is all about the behavior of the system, because mostly people sometimes press hardly on the system and they take more time between two keys, and other person might not have the same characteristics. So this is the keystroke pattern that actually have the identification mechanism of the user, and it also provide the authentication mechanism. One very important factor within the biometric mechanism is the error rating. and we talk, yes, we are talking about the biometric factor error rating. So it is very, very important that whenever you are planning for the biometric authentication mechanism, you consider the error rating. So two aspects are very there, which is first one is the false rejection rate, and false rejection rate actually occurs when the valid subject, a valid user, is not being authenticated. So I'm the valid user, I am not being authenticated by a biometric machine, then this is false mechanism. And other one is the ratio of the false rejection to the valid authentication, which is called false rejection rate. For example, you have the false rejection, you have the valid authentication as well. So the ratio would be your FRR, false rejection ratio rate. So false rejection rate is called type 1 error. So false rejection rate should be minimum so that the valid users are always authenticated properly. The other part is false acceptance rate. False acceptance occurs when the invalid subject is being authenticated. Like I told you that in previous case, the valid user was not being authenticated. But in this case, the invalid, the user is not a valid user, but it is being authenticated as a valid user. And this is known as the false positive authentication. And the false positive or false acceptance, because the system has accepted the person which is actually is not a valid user. So ratio of the false positive to the valid authentication is called false acceptance rate. And this is called type 2 error. So in our case, we want that our system should be accurate, that it should not accept the invalid subject to be authenticated. So we also want this ratio to the minimum, but getting this ratio to the minimum is very costly. So you have to pay more money to get such type of acceptance rate. So the solution is to have something, I would say, win-win situation. So how the win-win situation will occur? You have a balance between. So in this case, we have, let me take the mouse with me. Okay, so in this case, this is your equal error rate is your point. This is your point that you must have a win-win situation. So you are trying to minimize other factor type 1, type 2, and whenever you have the crossover for the type 1 and type 2, that is your best biometric device for you within your limited budget. Another aspect of in identity and access management is how we are going to implement the identity management. So identity management can be centralized, or it can be decentralized or distributed. So centralized access mechanism applies to all authorization verification which is being performed by the single entity within the system. So that is the concept of centralization. And decentralization access control mechanism is a distributed access control mechanism. And this is distributed throughout the system. So decentralized access control mechanism will require, might be several teams or multiple individuals, or it will increase the administrative overhead because you have the decentralized access mechanism with you. To prevent the decentralized, or probably when we talk about the centralized mechanism, the concept comes here is the single sign-on. So single sign-on is a centralized access mechanism which actually allow a subject to be authenticated once and access the multiple resources without being authenticated again and again and putting the password again and again. So user do not have to remember multiple username or multiple password. One username and one password is enough to get the multiple resources across the infrastructure. One disadvantage is that if the ID or the credentials are compromised, the whole access or whole account is compromised. So that is the disadvantage. You have to think about the risk assessment and risk management of your organization whenever you're talking about single sign-on, centralized or decentralized access mechanism. Whenever you're talking about the centralized access mechanism, the concept of the LDAP is there. So within the single organization or centralized access control mechanism, the LDAP is there, and LDAP is the lightweight direct access protocol. And Microsoft very renowned implementation is Active Directory is based on the LDAP. And there is also a relationship between the LDAP and PKI. That is, PKI infrastructure uses actually the LDAP, and it also integrates the digital certificate into its transmission. So you may and you will definitely going to see one or at least one question from the LDAP and multiple questions from the PKI. Another very important topic within this domain is the Kerberos. I would say after this presentation, you just Google the Kerberos. You need to understand how Kerberos is going to work. So the Kerberos is actually a ticketing mechanism which is being provided by some, I would say, some third-party entity to prove the identification and provide the authentication. And this type of mechanism is we known as the Kerberos mechanism. So Kerberos is offer, I would say, the centralized, the single sign-on solution for the user, and it will provide you the protection for the login credentials. And the current version of the Kerberos is the 5. One more important aspect when you are talking about the Kerberos, it uses symmetric key encryption, and currently it is using AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. So you might see, and you will definitely going to see some question from the Kerberos, and the symmetric key, AES are very important aspect that the question will be focusing on. There are multiple sub aspects within the Kerberos, and one of the topic is the KDC, which is a key distribution center. So key distribution center is actually a trusted third party which actually provide the authentication services. And if you talk about, for example, sometimes the KDC is the same system as the authentication system service. So Kerberos is which I said to you is using symmetric key. So it also using the PKI infrastructure. Another important aspect within the Kerberos is the Kerberos authentication server. So Kerberos authentication server actually hold the function of the KDC, and the KDC function is the ticket granting service and authentication service, and it is being abbreviated as the TGS, which is the ticket granting service, and AS, which is the authentication service. So authentication service actually verify or reject the authenticity and the timeline of the ticket. For example, if I am being authenticated by the Kerberos, I have the timestamp with my ticket that for how long I will be authenticated or my request will be the valid request. Another important thing is that TGT, which is a ticket granting ticket. And ticket granting ticket will provide you the proof that subject has already been authenticated through the KDC. So TGT is encrypted. It includes a symmetric key. It includes some expiration. It includes some user IP. So that this is a combo of all three aspects. And if something goes wrong with one of the key factor, the TGT, which is a ticket, which is going to expire or it is not going to be valid anymore. So this is how the system will be protected. And the ticket, as I said, is using the symmetric key, is definitely is the encrypted message, and it provides the proof that subject is authorized to access the object. So for the exam, the detail of the Kerberos, you have to find out over the internet, Google it. You have to study the book. The Kerberos topic is very important topic for this domain. So you have to be fully understand the Kerberos topic so that you can have, whenever you have a question within your exam, you can immediately point out the right answer. Another important aspect when we talk about the SSO, which is a single sign-on, is the FIM, which is a federated identity management. So federated identity management comes with some cloud application, I would say. So identity management, which actually uses the user identities and their credentials, and FIM, which is the federated identity management, is extend beyond the single organization. So two organizations want to collaborate, they are going to implement the FIM, which is the federated identity management. And remember, the single sign-on is limited to the single organization. In this area, we also have something, I would say, let me open this one as well. Yeah, authentication, OAuth. So OAuth is open authentication, and it is an open standard. And it's very important that whenever you are talking about the FIM, which is a federated identity management, we are talking about something OAuth or the OpenID. And OAuth is mostly used in the FIM, which is the open authentication. OpenID is also open standard, and it is maintained by the OpenID Foundation rather than the RFC standard, and it will provide you the decentralized authentication, because we are talking about the two different organizations which are actually collaborating with each other. So definitely the authentication mechanism will be the decentralized, and it will allow user to log into the multiple unrelated websites. For example, you are talking if you are talking about Asaka, and whenever you log into Asaka and you go to some their partner website, so they are using the FIM. You do not have to re-enter the username and password to log into some other site, to some other I would say the e-commerce portal, for example. So they are based on the FIM. So this is about within the 5.2 section, and 5.3 section talk about the integration of the identity as a third-party service. So integrating identity services is providing the additional tools and services for the identification and authentication of the user. And most of the time, this is being provided for the SSO. And most of the time, it is also being provided for the cloud-based systems, because employees or the employer do not want to put the hefty amount on the identity management. So what they do, they hire the services, and they get the services and access as a service. So they have a third-party tools, they pay it, and all the identification, access, user provisioning is being handled by some third party. The next subsection, which is 5.4, it's talk about the implementation and manage the authorization mechanism. So in this domain, we have to compare our multiple things. We have to compare the mechanism, control access mechanism within the authentication system. As we discussed about the subject and object, and subject is the active entity and object is passive entity, and the relationship between these subject and object is all about the access control mechanism. So we have the user, it has a role, it has a permission, it has a resources. So there is a very thin line of the concept when we talk about the permission, right, and privileges. So whenever you are studying the access control mechanism, you will come across the concept of permission, rights, and privileges. So there is some distinction between the permission, right, and privileges. Permission is refer to the access granted for an object and determine what you can do with it. For example, if you have a read permission for a file, you will be able to open it and read it. So you have a permission to open it. The right is primarily refer to the ability to take some action on an object. For example, user might have the right to modify the system's time on the computer, but the user may not change the time of the system. It has a right authority of the system. Privileges actually is a combination of the right and permission. For example, if an administrator have a full privileges, and what does this mean? That it can grant the full rights and permission on the computer. So privileges, rights, and permissions are three distinct concepts, and you have to have some clear these concepts, and there's a very thin line between these three concepts. One very important aspect within authorization mechanism and access control mechanism is the implicit denial. So what does this mean? A basic principle is having the deny by default. So the object will be denied unless it has been explicitly granted to the user or the subject. So by default, there is no access, zero access. So that is the base principle of implicit denial. Another concept is access control matrix. So access control matrix is a table which actually includes users, which is subject and object, and assigned privileges. So when a subject attempt to have some action, the system check the access control mechanism and determine if the subject has appropriate privileges to perform the action or not. So I said earlier before, the access control matrix is based on the subject. So the horizontal line will be your access matrix. And the related concept is the capability matrix, capability table. So capability table is another way to identify the privileges. So these are different from the ACL. As I said earlier before, the capability table is focused on the user. So what user can do. For example, on the capability table, a user can print on printer 1, on printer 2 it cannot print, on accounting folder it has full access, on payroll file it has no access. So these are the capabilities of the user. And access control matrix is focused on the something passive, I would say. For example, the vertical line, like this one. So you have to get the distinction between the access control matrix and the capability matrix. So understanding the authorization mechanism. So we also have something like constant interface. Sometimes the application uses a constant interface, or I would say the restricted interface, to restrict the access to the user. I might not have a print access. The print option might be disabled. That is a constant interface. So a common method would be to hide the capabilities if user do not have the permission. For example, the command might not be available to me if I have the constant interface with me. Another authorization mechanism is content dependent control. So content dependent control actually restrict access to the data based on the content within the object. So for example, a database view is a content dependent control. Another related type is important type is context dependent access. So context dependent access is based on some activity which actually should be performed before you have some other access. For example, if you are withdrawing some money from the web portal, you have to define some flow within the web system. You have a username, you have password, or even when you are trying to have some shopping with you. So before you check out, your bucket should have something which you are going to buy. If you are going to check out and you do not have the bucket, you won't be able to come to that particular page. So that is context dependent control. Another area of the understanding is the need to know basis principle, and this principle ensured that subjects are granted access to only what they wanted to know. So you won't be able to access anything, even you have the right, but if your job description is do not entitle you to know this thing, you may not have access to that particular information. That is about the need to know mechanism. Another mechanism is the least privileges. The principle of least privileges will ensure that subjects are granted only the privileges they need to perform their work or job task. So this is also sometimes referred to as a need to know. The only difference would be that the least privileges will include right to take some action on the system. That I have a least privileges to take some action. If I wanted to take a backup on the system, I will be granted access only to take the backup of the system, not the full administrative privileges. Another concept within this mechanism comes in the separation of duties and responsibilities. And the separation of duties and responsibilities principle ensures that uh, that the sensitive function are split into tasks performed by two employees or multiple employees, so that it can prevent the frauds, or it can prevent uh, something from happening by putting two-man control or four eyes principle. In implementing defense in depth technology, so this is also important in the access control and mechanism. So organization implement controls using defense in depth strategy. So you have multiple layers of the security, and you cannot depend upon one single technology or a single layer that is going to safeguard your asset. So always have defense in depth set up within your environment. Another important aspects within access control mechanism, having uh, different access control models within you. So these are also very important because you are going to have 3 to 4 questions about these type of the access control models. So first one is the discretionary access control mechanism, which is a DAC. So DAC model is every object has an owner. So it's a discretion of the owner to grant or deny the access to the system. For example, if you create a file, you are the owner, and you can grant a permission to other user or not user. That type of access mechanism is the discretionary access control mechanism. Other control mechanism is the role-based access control mechanism. So key characteristic of role-based access, it is uses the roles. For example, I have the role of the backup operator. I have the role of the checker. I have a role of the loan officer. I have the role of the manager. So I will get the access based on my role. Other model is the rule-based access control mechanism. And a key characteristics of rule-based access control mechanism is applied to the global rule to the all subject, all user. For example, firewall rule is going to block all traffic of all user equally. It is not going to distinguish between the user. So rule-based access control mechanism is there. Another type is attribute-based access control mechanism, and it uses the rule that can include multiple attributes. For example, firewall attribute. For example, my manager will be permitted to some particular website. I will be denied to that particular site. So these are the rule-based uh, with attribute-based access control mechanism. Another implementation mechanism is the MAC, and MAC is the mandatory access control mechanism, and it is based on the labels. So whenever you are talking about the labels, you are talking about the MAC mechanism, which is a mandatory access control mechanism, and it is applied to both users and the object. So both subject and object must have the same label in order to get the access of the system. Now talk about the non-discretionary access control mechanism. So we have the discretionary, and in which the administrator will provide the access to the user, and now we have the non-discretionary access control mechanism. So in the non-discretionary access control mechanism, the administrator is going to manage the access of the system. But in the case of the centralized mechanism, which is we have the one administrator, that is the case of the non-discretionary. The central administrator is going to manage this one. And if we have a distributed environment and we have the local administrator, then it is based on the discretion of the local administrator to provide you access or not. Also in non-DAC, which is the non-discretionary access control mechanism, access doesn't focus on the user identity. Another important aspect, which is I would say the last area of this domain, is to focus on the different attacks on the access control mechanism. And attack is the simply basically avoiding or the stealing the user credentials so that it can launch some attack on for the online or the identity theft or having some user resources if the user is unknown. So in the last topic, we are going to talk about the different attacks on the access control mechanism, and these are password attacks, for example. So passwords are the weakest form of the authentication. So if the attacker is successful on the password attack, it can get the access to the system. So in this case, you must have a very strong password with you. Also, the password must not be stored in the clear text. It must always be hashed. It must be encrypted, and you must always change your default password. Another attack is the dictionary attack. So in dictionary attack, the attacker is attempt to discover the password based on every possible password in predefined database. So if you have a complex password, this is not going to be successful. Then we have a brute force attack. So it's attempt to discover the password for the users by systematically attempting all combination of the letter, number, and symbol. This is a very, very tricky and a very long process. But we have the powerful machine. It is going to be very, very going to be fast actually. Now we have the birthday attacks. And the birthday attack is focused on the collision. For example, it says that if we have, for example, the 50 person within the room, that there is a 50% chances that 20 that two of them will have the same common birthday date. So there's a possibility that if we have large number of the people within the room, within the area, then there's a possibility that two will have the same password. Another attack is the rainbow attack, and in rainbow attack we have already predefined hashes against some passwords. So what the hacker will do, hacker will get the hashes from your system, and it will try to match the hashes of already pre-computed databases. So if the hash match, the hacker will get the password as well. Sniffer attack. So sniffer capture the packet. So if you are sending some clear traffic over there, your password will be captured, your identity, your authorization will be sniffed by the attacker, and it will be used for some other malicious activity. Spoofing attack. So spoofing is a masquerading or pretending to be something or someone else. So you might have received some spoofed email, spoofed call. So the user awareness is very important in this regard. We have the email spoofing, we have the phone number spoofing, in which we have the same number the person is calling, but that person is not actually calling us. And these all comes under part of the spoofing or phishing type of attack. And there is another type which is called a social engineer attack, and in this case it is very easy to get someone password with some social engineering tricks. So what's your birthday, how you manage your password. So you are trying to impersonate someone that you are trying to get the information that is used for the password or the system access. Phishing is also a form of the social engineering, and it is actually an attempt to trick the user into giving some sensitive information. So phishing is a general email that is sent to the large population, and you are hoping that you will get the credentials from the user. Spear phishing is a type of the phishing which actually target to specific group of the user. For example, the specific department of the organization. Whaling or is a variant of the phishing in which the hacker is targeting the upper management like the CEOs, directors, and it is very, very defined phishing email to the targeted person. Another attack is the vishing. So in vishing attack, the person is going to call you over the VoIP, voice over IP. So you are trying to the person is trying to pretend someone you already know. So the hacker is actually trying to get the information from you using a phone call. Another type of attack is the smart cards attack, in which the hacker try to copy the smart card information. It try to get the PIN identification information from the card. So these type of the fall under the smart. So these are all attacks that actually hacker is trying to apply to get the information of the identity and access. So this is the last part, and within 5 to 10 minutes we are going to complete this domain. The last section is the managing the identity and access provision lifecycle. And if we talk about the lifecycle, it's all about having the provision, account review, and account revocation. So in provisioning, we have the initial step of the creation of the new account. So whenever you are trying to create the new account, you are actually having your step of the provisioning. So user account should not be created randomly. User account should not be created as a general or the group account. So it should be a unique user ID. So there should be some enrollment process with you that actually create the new identity. Account review. So account review should be periodically reviewed actually. So it is important that actually whenever you review the account, you get some particular information like last login date, last login IP, last login time, etc. So by having the account review, you can avoid the excessive privileges and privileges creeping. So this is what we are talking about. And the last part is the account revocation. So whenever employee is leaving, you have to disable, you have to revoke the access. So that is your last area of the identity lifecycle. You provision, you review, and you revoke the access. So this is all about the domain number 5, identity and access management. And in this domain, we'll talk about different access mechanism, user IDs, DAC, MAC, and we'll talk about the password or identity attacks. In last area, we talk about the life cycle of the identity. So if you are interested in detailed bootcamp of the CISSP, this is going to happen after 1 week, and this is uh, the weekend course, and it is going to start on July 6th and ending on July 20th. And this is full time, 8 hours course, 5 days. So if you are interested, do contact on this email address. The course would be very detailed oriented with question answers of which is near to real time question answer which you may face in your CISSP exam. So if you have any question, please do let me know, and we after that we may close this session. Any question so far, please let me know. I have opened the I have unmuted the all persons. Any questions so far?
Yes, Ahmed, this is Asbak. I have a question regarding the birthday attack. I mean, I'm a little bit confused about it. Can you please repeat that? How the birthday attacks can occur, how the attacker can identify what is the probability, what is the, percentage, so that would be clear in that. Thank you.
Okay, so birthday attack is simply the mathematical probability. So there is nothing to worry about that. What is going? This is a mathematic formula which is already renowned to the mathematician. That it says that if you have 23 people within the room, for example, there is a 50% chances that 2% will have the same birthday. So this is by this what the hacker will do, it will reduce the success of the attacks probability or the password cracking. So by using the hashing algorithm, putting the hoping that collision will occur, it will try to figure out the password, that if the 23 peoples are there is a possibility that 2 people will have the same password, and then it will try to have a dictionary password attack or brute force attack. So this is how the mechanism will work.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, any other question so far? Okay, probably we can close this session, and I will upload the video or the recorded session of this to GISPP official channel, and I would request Mr. Shehzad Suhani to upload as soon as possible. I provide to them this video over the shared folder. Thank you very much, every participant. If Shehzad sir, if you are available, if you want to say something, or you can do something. I think Shehzad is not there. So thank you very much, everyone, and it was a nice session. And if you have missed any part, the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our official channel, and you can view it freely and whenever you have a time. And if you come across any query, do send an email to me. I will reply as soon as possible. And if you are interested in the bootcamp, do also let me know. I will have a session for you people. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a nice day. Bye bye.